Hello, everyone. My name is Bryce Kuhn, Dylan Sanders, and Glenn West. We are here with the Go 24/7 podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to hit the subscribe button, set up notifications, and leave a comment down below. If you're listening in any podcast form, just follow, like it, and subscribe it. Completely free to do. I know subscribe is a scary word for some people, but it's completely free to do on YouTube and any podcast platform that you may be listening. Got an interesting topic today. It's kind of come full circle. You know, what is it now, 2 years ago, guys, that we were talking about Oklahoma and Texas joining the SEC. And over the past couple of days, kind of the news broke that they were going to get to do it a year earlier. First off, credit to Big 12 Commissioner for kind of just noticing, hey, it doesn't benefit us for them to stay any longer. And I think they showed this year the Big 12 was really competitive outside of Texas and Oklahoma. But those two teams are going to be making their way to the SEC after a $100 million buyout combined in 2024. So this 2023 season is the final season that we will see the 14-team SEC conference. And it brings up a lot of different, well, let's say a lot of different questions. And so we're going to start first with one, I think, guys, that we have to sit here and say is kind of the most notable one is, what does a schedule look like in a 16-game SEC or 16-team SEC conference? And look, I think I was reading something like last May when the conferences come together and SEC comes together, they sit here and say, okay, what are different ones? They got it down to like 30 different models. And then they continue to dwindle it down. And Glenn, we'll start with you on this. It kind of feels like the one that makes most sense here might be the 9-game model, which then forces, with what the ACC ended up doing last year, you're going to have 3 permanent teams. And so we want to hear, I know the fans are going to have a lot of input on this. Who are LSU's 3 permanent teams? They're going to play year in and year out. They're not going to rotate them. Who do you see? Who do you start with in this sense?
Yeah, so I think there are probably 2 models that they were considering for a while there. I would say that the 8-game model with one consistent opponent every year was the other one. But it definitely feels like they've kind of gravitated towards the 9-game schedule with 3 consistent opponents. And I think LSU, when you're just looking at rivalries and you're looking at the last 20 years of what who LSU's biggest kind of rivals have been, you would certainly throw Alabama into that mix. You would throw Ole Miss into that mix. And I would say Florida. I mean, we were talking about this right before we got on, but I can't really think of another team in terms of just really the last 15, 16, 17 years that has been such a great game seemingly every year. I mean, there's the one game here and there where, these two programs, have a blowout, but for the most part, this is a game that comes down to, 6, 7, 3 points. And, I think it's, one score game has been, kind of the outcome for many of the last several meetings between these two teams. So I would say those are the 3 that I personally would love to see. But I also think that A&M is going to find a way to weasel in there as a 9-game, one of the consistents for LSU, whether that's replacing Alabama or it's replacing Florida. I just think A&M is going to be in there, is going to be in that mix. And so, yeah, I would say probably those 3 or 4 are the ones that I'm looking at for a 9-game schedule.
Yeah, Dylan, I mean, you mentioned earlier before we started, Florida was your number 1. You wanted to see that matchup remain. If that's your number 1, where do you go 2 and 3?
Well, Glenn made a good point in that Texas A&M is probably going to be in there. We've already seen them kind of successfully manufacture a rivalry between LSU and Texas A&M, to where now that game, it is in rivalry week, but it kind of came out of nowhere, being put into that spot. But it worked out because now there's a lot of animosity between the two schools. The games are fun. It's now turning into a back and forth kind of game. And I think that they see the potential there to just have the two teams play every year. And when thinking about other teams that Texas A&M would play every year as well, it kind of makes sense that LSU would be in there for them. It's not just, oh, how does this affect LSU? It's also like, well, what makes sense for the other school as well. And I think Texas A&M and LSU are kind of interlocked to where I think that'll be one of them. Texas A&M, their only other. It'll be interesting to see if they get stuck with Texas every year. I mean,
Probably.
I think all of college football wants it to happen. Texas A&M, one of the most underutilized rivalries in the past few years. But bring that one back. But I think in terms of LSU, I think I'd go Florida A&M, and I think the third, if I had to keep one around, would probably be Ole Miss over Bama.
Yeah,
that just seems like the classic rivalry. That's the classic. Florida's. Yeah, you keep LSU Ole Miss. That's your classic rivalry. LSU Florida is more of the new decade rivalry, and then Texas A&M is the new rivalry. So I think those would be my three if I were to pick a three. Of course, and I won't complain about not playing Bama every year. I'll come out and say it. I'm not going to complain about not having that on the schedule every year.
Yeah. No, that's look, games are going to be lost. And I wrote this down, and Glenn, you kind of mentioned the other potential model is the 1 permanent and 7 rotating, the 8-game conference model. And so I kind of wrote down this. There's no guarantee that Texas would play Texas A&M and Oklahoma every year. Texas-Oklahoma, as a college football fan, one of the better rivalries to watch, not this past year, but usually one of the best rivalries to watch in college football. Obviously Alabama would play Auburn, but then you would lose the permanency of I don't even know if that's a word I just said, but we're going to make it a
permanence,
word because we can do that. The permanence, sure, let's roll with it. That Alabama would play Tennessee every year. They would lose that one. That's obviously a big rivalry. If Auburn and Alabama are permanent, Auburn doesn't play Georgia. Kind of where a rivalry where you talked about, Dylan, in saying the classic rivalry. Auburn, Georgia's a classic rivalry. So it's going to be really interesting to see where they go with this.
Florida, Georgia is another classic one.
Florida, Georgia's another one. I mean, I'll say this. If I'm an LSU fan, I really want Ole Miss to stay. And I'm with you. The classic, the history, Glenn, you pointed out over 100 years of that rivalry. I want that one to stay, and especially, after you beat them this year too.
But again, if we're taking out the 1 permanent game, I think that's where you really see LSU and A&M. I think it would still be LSU and A&M. Ole Miss is 1 game is Mississippi State.
That's where
Auburn's
that's where
1
I'm
game
not in
is
favor of the 8-team.
Yeah, Auburn's game is Alabama.
Alabama. Yeah.
Georgia and Florida.
Yeah.
Texas, Oklahoma. Mizzou, Vandy, I guess.
Mizzou, Vandy. There you go.
Tennessee,
Kentucky, Tennessee, Kentucky, maybe. I don't know. I don't know about the East. It missed me with the SEC East.
I'm not sure where Arkansas fits in.
Yeah, but I think if there's 1 game, I think you'd be stuck with LSU A&M, because LSU is nobody's number 1 rival.
They have a lot of good rivalries.
They have a lot of good rivalries. LSU's because you look at all these other schools, it's schools that are super close in proximity, or Florida, Georgia just has the history.
Or Dylan, they have an in-state rival, Ole Miss, Mississippi State.
Yeah, in-state,
Alabama,
in-state.
Auburn.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, the way the last couple of years have gone, if Texas and Oklahoma weren't joining the SEC, I think you could make an argument that A&M and LSU are probably each other's number 1 rival. I mean, it's been.
I think so. So I think it's just because it is newer and was kind of manufactured, but the games have been great ever since the 7 overtime misery. That night will always live in infamy. That night and LSU baseball's 19-inning loss.
I mean, that's the other thing. You want to have these games where there's some really great past history too. I mean, where there's great games that you can go back and point to in their histories and say, well, this is why we want this to be an every year kind of occurrence. And I think there's enough of that in recent years with the A&M matchups, certainly with Florida, Alabama, and certainly with Ole Miss as well. Though I do think, for the most part, I think LSU's had Ole Miss's number. When you look back at the series in recent history, but those are the kind of collective of 3 or 4 teams that I think just make just a ton of sense for LSU as a permanent matchup every year.
Yeah, and you kind of alluded to this, and so I'll kind of unravel this as well. I mean, look, you want the most appealing matchups, and you know who really wants those appealing matchups? The TV executives. That's what they want. And so if it's gonna be interesting to see if it comes down to the 8 game or the 9 game, and the 9 with the 3 rotating, and you get to create more matchups. Like we talk about, LSU Ole Miss gets to be a part of it. LSU Florida gets to be a part of it. I think that's where we're going to see. And look, it's just a part of college football. The media folks are going to come and say, "Yeah, this is really what we want. We want to push, especially with the SEC's new deal with ESPN moving forward and kind of housing everything under that. No longer the 3:30 CBS kickoff, which I'll shed a tear. I grew up
Yeah.
on that. It's gonna make me sad.
I'll miss the music. If
And look,
they
when
already
you're
started playing the
rotating-
music for Big Ten games, and it felt so wrong.
And here's the other thing: when you're rotating these other 13 teams, you're doing the math there. I mean, you're playing these other teams once every 3 years. I mean, like I think you're still getting that regular relative occurrence, so that you're playing them instead of playing Missouri once in 8 years or something like that. I mean, I think you're playing them every couple of years, which I think is a really great way to kind of get away from the one time you meet up with South Carolina in the 2010s or something like that. I mean, there are a couple of matchups like that for LSU where they just didn't play a lot of these teams in on the east side of things, and so having that relative kind of clockwork where you're rotating these teams in every couple of years, I think is only really a good thing.
I like that.
I was going to say, though, if we also need to take a look at the teams joining, I think that there is great potential through multiple sports to have LSU Texas really start to be a thing, because it took one game in 2019 and the two teams hated each and it has bled through to baseball since, and obviously they play again this year in baseball. I think that has a great potential to be utilized, because I think it's two very passionate fan bases across multiple sports. And LSU and Texas, well, SEC in general runs college baseball, but LSU Texas, it has potential to be like classic after classic every year, because those are two massive teams.
Yeah, you get the opportunity to play a whole weekend series, against them, not just a midweek game. That's going to be a lot of fun to kind of monitor and going forward. Another thing that this did, 2024 also going to be the start of the college football playoff expanding to 12 teams. Now, look, it has been argued ad nauseum whether you like 12 teams or not. We are not here to discuss that today. That is a whole season worth of podcast that we could go into and dissect that.
I'm pro, by the way.
You're pro. That's fine. That's fine. I still like you. That's fine, though. No, let's talk this, because year one under Brian Kelly, we've talked about it a lot. Was a good year. Made it to the SEC championship. Is the expectation on LSU in a 12-team playoff? Is it a disappointment if you're not one of the top 12 teams in the country every single year, in your opinion, under the new SEC? I mean, look, it's going to be a tougher schedule, but to me still, I mean, now you're seeing where, look, you lose 2 games in this new SEC, you could still be easily a top 12 team, and LSU was nearly just that this season.
Well, look, I mean, I think if the expectations in a 14 playoff is for LSU to be among that number most years than not, then I would also say that, yeah, being in a 12-team playoff is certainly going to be the goal year in, year out. I mean, one of the mantras is graduate champions here under Kelly, and so the only way you can graduate a champion, unless you're winning the SEC West every year and count that as a champion, but the only way you can do that is by getting into the playoff and winning a national championship. And so I mean that to me is certainly I think the baseline of what you hope LSU would be able to achieve year in and year out. I mean, it's going to be a gauntlet of a schedule every year, but the way things kind of shake out, I think you'll have those years where, yeah, you're playing one of those those 3 teams every year, whether it's Bama, Florida, Ole Miss, A&M, but you're probably rotating in a Missouri, Vanderbilt kind of year, or a South Carolina kind of year, where some of those programs have been down for a while, and I think you can kind of navigate the schedule a little bit easier. And so I just like everything about the way the schedules are getting decided right now. I think it certainly leaves a lot of optimism and I think competitive nature here for all these teams. And but I mean, you're looking at the SEC here is going to be the super conference of college football, and I mean, how many of those teams get in every year? Is it 4? Is it 5? Is it 3?
Yeah.
I mean, like you're going to have a group of 6, or a group of 5 player every year. I mean, so you can cancel that out. Most of the conference champions, or all of the conference champions, are going to get in from the Power 5. So that's 6 teams right there. So you're really left over with 4 or 5 spots, and so does that I think it opens up a lot of different avenues, but I think the spots go quickly if you don't win the SEC, and it's going to be hard to win the SEC with these 2 new teams, and also with what you have to face on a year in year out basis with the Georgias and the Alabamas and everybody in the conference.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree. I think that, and I want to pose this question to you, Dylan. I mean, if you don't win the SEC, I mean, the idea of winning the SEC, what is it going to give you? It's going to give you a bye. I mean, you're going to be one of the top 2 ranked. If you win the SEC in this new SEC, you're going to get a bye. If not, you're going to have to battle it out. But, I mean, how many SEC teams get in here? I mean, people are nervous that, like the expansion, have said, is the SEC just going to dominate? I mean, that's kind of been the SEC's conversation. And look, they've dominated the 4-team playoff. I don't see any reason for me why they wouldn't dominate a 12-team playoff.
Yeah, I mean, that it kind of plays into the fact of, I think it's better for college football as a whole, because if you're going to have 2/4 of the playoffs every year be SEC, at least expanding to 12 will get more new faces in. If it's 4 out of 12, I think that's, it's a better ratio than 2 out of 4. So I think it gives more opportunity for other conferences to get in. I mean, obviously guaranteed bids and all, but I think that LSU definitely, it'll be the expectation to make the playoff every year. That'll be the next contract bonus whenever they in 10 years, whenever they renegotiate, will be blank for a playoff appearance or whatever. It's the goal. I think you're looking at Alabama still in every year, Georgia in every year, and then maybe the next 2 best teams, or one best team if you're like looking at a year like this.
Well, here's something else that I kind of want to back up a little bit. So you're going to have all the champions, all the Power 5 conference champions in, right? So that's what, 5 teams there.
And what is the highest ranked group of 5 champion?
Yeah, the highest ranked group of 5. Makes 6. So that really leaves you 6 spots to kind of play with in terms of the top 12. And we're talking about the SEC expansion, but also look, the Big Ten just added USC and UCLA. Those are 2 top high-end programs. You still got Oregon over there in the Pac-12. I'm sure Oregon's going to run through the Pac-12 every year, so they might be the conference champion.
Washington has a good coach and had a good year this year.
But and then there's just, I think the spots might fill up a little bit more than you would probably think. I mean, there's a lot of programs, because between, you look at USC, UCLA, Michigan and Ohio State in the Big Ten, well, 3 of those teams aren't going to win their conference championship. So, theory would tell you that at least a couple of them are going to be pretty good, even if they don't win the championship in their conference. So, do they take a couple spots, and then, you're looking at 3 or 4, and then, so I think it certainly, there's a lot of room for, to where the SEC might not totally dominate in a 12-team league and a 12-team championship environment. So,
this year there would have been 3 SEC teams.
Yeah.
And then Tulane.
Yeah.
Former Tulane. SEC champions.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, like, there's, I think this is a good model. This 12-team model is good for the playoff because, it gives you extra weeks of football, and it gives you more to play for, more teams that feel involved, and more excitement around it.
You can't tell me USC going to Penn State in January is not going to be a fun thing. Like, just a fun possibility.
USC going to Rutgers will not be fun, but I do agree with you that
and you mentioned
for anybody.
You mentioned the TV stuff. I mean, the TV companies are going to be all on board for 12-team expansion. I mean, it provides more opportunities, and you've seen kind of over the years, these bowl games don't mean as much, if you're not in the conference and if you're not in the national championship picture, but if you're, a first round draft pick out of, let's say Penn State, and Penn State gets the 11th seed. Are you leaving a chance at a national championship, on the table for just to go leave a couple months early? No, I think you're probably staying, and as opposed to maybe playing in some New Year's Six bowl game that really doesn't mean as much. So I think this is a really good opportunity for college football, and so we'll see what happens with it. But I like the idea that the SEC might not necessarily dominate this tournament moving forward.
You guys almost convinced me to like playoff expansion. I'll say this: I may not love it, but I will watch it. All of us will, regardless of the people who are on social media. We're going to watch it. We're going to watch it.
Why even bother arguing? Because we're all going to watch whatever product they put in because we're addicted.
I'm going to watch the XFL in the next couple weeks because I just need something to hold me over. So until that passes. Last topic here of the conversation. It brings into a good point. Does out-of-conference scheduling take a dip, or does it take a rise? And I want to kind of look at the future of LSU non-conference opponents. Obviously, this upcoming season won't be impacted. They're playing Florida State. That's the big one, Grambling, Army, and Georgia State. But then 2024. Now, I don't know how this is going to impact.
That year is going to be rough.
Well, and it's going to be.
It's going to be fun.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. Does that stay? What is the Big Ten schedule? Does it affect that? Obviously, USC in Las Vegas. They're playing Rice, UCLA, South Alabama. But 2025 at Clemson. You get Clemson 2026, Houston 27. As we get further out, Arizona State, Utah. But what do you guys think quickly as we kind of round this podcast out? And Dylan, we'll start with you, and then we'll go to Glenn. I mean, does non-conference scheduling get easier because of how hard the SEC is going to be? Or does this encourage teams to, schedule tougher out-of-conference games into where, TV rights people are going to love it? Especially TV rights people, you'll have a national game, primetime slot every single week, LSU fans, if you keep that 2024 schedule.
Well, I think a year like this year is scarier to teams than even a potential new schedule because, you saw top teams aren't safe, aren't as safe. So I don't know. I feel like teams will be looking for more excuses to schedule cupcakes. Brian Kelly has already mentioned he wants to do more of Louisiana smaller schools. Just because it is good for the state. If the money's going somewhere, it might as well go in state. I don't think that they'll be rushing to fill out play half of a Big Ten season in one season along with their SEC schedule anymore.
Yeah, Glenn, what do you think?
I kind of tend to differ a little bit. I think it's still important to have those good non-conference schedule opponents. For every Florida State loss you had last year, you also have the Texas win in 2019 that really helped propel that team onto the national scene. And I think they rode that momentum for the rest of the year. And, I just think there's a lot of good opportunities there for you to schedule out of conference opponents. It tells you where you stack up with other conferences in the league or in the nation. And so, I like the idea of still scheduling some of these powerhouses, and you could also make the argument that if you lose one of those games, say you lose to Florida State this year, well, in 5 years, if you were to lose to Florida State in the first game of the year, it wouldn't matter as much because you would have an opportunity to get yourself back up into that top 12 range because of your conference schedule. So, does a 9-3 LSU team this last year, is that a top 12 team in 2 years? When this thing goes into effect, the team that finished 9-3, do they make the top 12? I think it's a conversation.
Yeah.
I think what did they finish, like 15 or 16 in the final
I think the
college football?
final college football poll and AP poll was around in between 14 and 17. I think if you
So
kind of averaged everything out.
yeah, I mean, you say you win one of those games, and you're right there in the mix for right in the middle of it, and you only lost a couple games. So yeah, it dilutes kind of the regular season importance, and I think that's probably why a lot of people don't like this 12 game model. But I also think it keeps it keeps players and it keeps teams engaged because they also have the realization that, hey, if we only lose one or two games, we still have a chance at really being in the middle of it by the end of December. So, I think it's a good thing. I mean, I certainly understand the people who want to keep it, small and, but there hasn't been as much parity as we've seen in the last 7 or 8 years because of the dominance of the SEC. And college sports are made for upsets. We see it in basketball all the time, baseball, and so many other sports. If you had a top 12 where, I think there's probably really, really solid teams across the board, you might get an upset or two in the first round that really generates a lot of excitement and activity. And that's kind of what it's all about at the end of the day.
And I'll say this to kind of round it out: who wouldn't want to see what Tulane did this past year after they beat USC? That'd be really cool to see them get a shot as well. He's Dylan Sanders. Go ahead.
Can you imagine if those two teams were playing for a college football, in a college football playoff bracket and Tulane beats USC? I mean, it's already the greatest win in program history, but it would certainly, increase the level of importance of that game. So I think there's a lot of benefits to it.
It's going to be fun to watch. And like I said, I mean, we can talk about it till the cows come home, essentially, but we're going to watch it. And that's bottom line. I'm still going to watch it. I'm going to enjoy it. It just might take getting some used to, just like it did when they went from the BCS to the 4, when they went to the BCS well before Dylan was probably born. But that was that's the first time I've ever been able to pull the old man card, Glenn, and saying that I watched a BCS National Championship. So, hey, that's all the time we have for today. This has been the Go 24/7 podcast. Dylan Sanders, Glenn West. My name is Bryce Kuhn. Make sure to check us out on Go 24/7. We've got some great stuff. Baseball season starts off this Friday. Going to be a lot of fun to follow that all season long. I know everyone's itching and ready to go for that. Spring football is not too far away, and Glenn and I were just talking about it beforehand. It will be here, and we can't wait. And everyone say a prayer for Dylan as he is working towards graduation. He is going to do it. He can't wait to be done, and he can do it. He's taken the Glenn West route of absolutely being as studious as possible. Is that right, Glenn?
No comment.
Absolutely love it. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll catch you next time on the Go 24/7 podcast.